everybody. Are mics working?
Are they?
Are they?
I think they are.
Okay.
I can, yeah.
There we go.
Okay.
So as I was doing research for this, Jonelle, I typed into Google Apollo and history. And the first three images that came up, the first one was the Apollo marquee. So let's take a look at that. That came before Apollo, the god of music and truth, and before the Apollo space mission.
Oh, right, right.
So when you
As it should.
I was going to ask, so as you think about this, what does this say about the importance of the Apollo, that it was the first image that popped up?
Well, the Apollo opened its doors in 1934, so this is our 85th year. And I would say that it really, for 85 years, and certainly when the first, I'd say, 20 years, set the tone for entertainment. It really launched the careers of pretty much anyone in the music business, or theater or comedy. These are people of color, and that was primarily because, that it was segregated and they couldn't work anyplace. And one noteworthy thing to talk about here is that the Apollo was one of the first theaters that allowed people of color on the stage, but also people in the audience. So we're really proud of it. But it has quite a legacy because of all of the people who were, on our stage and whose careers were launched.
We think about the Apollo. I'm glad you brought up the history of it, because I think for anybody in this room, it's always been there.
Right.
And you can almost take something for granted that's like that. Why shouldn't we take the Apollo for granted? I mean, I think I kind of know because of the kind of talent it's produced, but in terms of its impact culturally, an impact for African American communities, specifically Harlem.
Well, it definitely was a beacon for the Harlem community, and it was a place of opportunity. It was a place that did encourage people to come in and hone their craft, and gave people a start, a launching pad, if you will. But also, it was a place where performers felt at home, and they felt that they could come and commune with their colleagues. They could talk about, issues of the times, things that really impacted the uptown community, and that's what we continue to do today. We have what we call the Uptown Hall, which is a series of conversations about topical issues, and that really is an extension of what the Apollo meant back in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, and certainly during the civil rights movement in the 60s. It held a number of fundraisers during the civil rights movement, and it was a gathering place. I think that's an important point, a gathering place for people to come when they felt like they needed to talk about things that were on their minds and that affected the uptown community.
I was glad you brought this up. I was going to bring it up later. There's this great book, I don't know if anyone has read it, Palaces for the People. And it talks about social infrastructure and how important that is, as well as hard infrastructure. And there were two lines in it that made me think about the Apollo. And one is, robust social infrastructure doesn't just protect our democracy, it contributes to economic growth. The writer goes on to say, it's building social infrastructure, it's just as urgent as repairing our levees, our airports, and our bridges. When you think about the social infrastructure of the Apollo, what do you think it has contributed to the community, not aside from the artists, but to the community of Harlem and to New York City?
Well, I mean, it's sort of what I was saying earlier. It's a place that people can talk about the things that are affecting the community.
What are some of the things right now that people are talking about in these town hall meetings?
Well, the town hall meetings are really focused on issues. So, for example, the elections. We might have a panel discussion on the issues that are being focused on for a particular election. We may have a viewing party, if you will, of a debate, and then there will be conversations about that. We do something every January for Martin Luther King's birthday. We collaborate with WNYC, and we
My other job.
yeah, your other job, which is why I mentioned it. And we talk about the theme for this one was 50 years after the movement, and so I think that it is a place where we are kind of bringing to the forefront issues of concern, and people know that they can come to the Apollo and deal with these things.
Has anybody here been to the Apollo? Oh, yay, good.
See, but I see some
For
some hands here.
Yeah, for folks who haven't, let's take a look. We've got a little bit of video of the inside. It's just gorgeous. When was it this the restoration done?
Well, actually, it's a phased renovation. We started renovating it in the early 2000s. We put new seats in, we put a new stage in, but actually we are in the quiet phase of a capital campaign to raise money to complete the renovation. And one of the exciting things about what's going on for us in the future is that we are getting ready to expand. The first time that the Apollo's ever physically expanded in its 85 years. There is a mixed-use development 2 doors to the east of the theater, the Victoria Theater, and there are cultural spaces there. And we've been designated as the operator-manager of these spaces. There's a 99-seat theater and a 199-seat theater, which means that we can be a performing arts center. And this is very important. Again, when we talk about community and the impact of the theater, you know, we always felt like, why shouldn't Uptown have a performing arts center like a Lincoln Center, like BAM, like the Kennedy Center in Washington? And so the idea that we will now have 4 spaces, performance spaces, is really important. And again, it's going to enable us to do more programs that are impacting our community. A 99-seat theater and a 199-seat theater are spaces that can be programmed differently. You can have more conversations. You know, we feel that we can expand on this idea of the Uptown Hall and, you know, do podcasts, stream those conversations, those important conversations, so you don't necessarily have to be in the theater to have that experience. The other thing is, I think that cultural organizations have a responsibility to the communities in which they reside. And that's something that we certainly take very seriously at the Apollo. So we have a very robust education program. We have other community programs that welcome families and just people who have nothing to do with the performing arts. And so we think that, and other cultural organizations who would like to utilize the space. The Apollo has 1,500 seats, and that's sometimes too large and too expensive for other cultural organizations. So these new spaces are going to allow us to collaborate more with local community organizations, and I think that's really important, and I'm really excited about that.
Anyone who's been Uptown in the past 15 years knows it has changed tremendously the past 20 years. We should probably talk about the G word, gentrification. What has been the impact of gentrification on the Apollo?
Well, I think it's good in the sense that there are more people. I've been at the helm of the Apollo for 16 years now, and when I first started running the theater, the community was kind of languishing. The theater was languishing. Frederick Douglass Boulevard really had nothing on it. In fact, my kids used to play in the Harlem Little League, and we used to play in, you know, spaces on Frederick Douglass. And so I watched it develop in 10 years. I saw what that meant, and that meant that, and gentrification, people say, well, where did all those people go? In that particular instance, there were no people on Frederick Douglass. And so what that did for the Apollo is it brought people into the community. There were a lot of residential units, And then with residential housing goes the amenities, you know, the restaurants, the grocery stores. And so there was an influx of people, if you will, and a lot of young people. And so that's the good thing. I think that what's important for the Apollo and my fellow cultural organizations or institutions on 125th Street is, and in Harlem, is to preserve the integrity of the institution. So I feel a deeper commitment to ensuring that the Apollo is going to continue to be this beacon for the Harlem community and for people of color. And to that point, along with this vision to be an Apollo Performing Arts Center, is to be the crucible, if you will, for the creation of a 21st century performing arts canon that focuses on the African American narrative and the African diaspora performing arts, the artist. And so we really want to put a stake in the ground and be the place where these artists will come to workshop their work, where they'll feel like it's a home. And that's really very similar to what it was when it opens its doors in 1934.
It's making me think, for example, Two Dope Queens
Right.
went out to the Bell House into Brooklyn.
Right.
In the perfect world, Two Dope Queens would be at the Apollo.
I would love to have two dope queens at the Apollo, definitely.
When you
They've
start
actually been to the Apollo, but I wish they
Excellent.
were here on a regular basis.
I'm going to ask a couple more questions, and then we're going to go to the audience for questions. I was fortunate to interview your executive producer, Camilla Forbes.
Yes.
She directed Lynn Nottage's play Vera Stark over at New Stages, and I just threw in an extra question about the Apollo because that's what you're supposed to do.
Right.
And she said to me, I said to her, how do you've addressed this a bit, how do you move legacy institutions forward? All of these legacy institutions, the Atlantic, the
Right.
New Yorker, everybody
Right.
is struggling with how do you maintain your integrity and your brand, but also invite in new voices and new people. And one of the things she said is she thinks that a lot of people think of the institution as a historical relic. So there's a little bit of changing
Right.
of attitudes and ideas about that. How do you go about changing people's minds?
I think you have to show them, and that's where Camila comes in. Camila, as Allison just said, is our executive producer, and she's creating this new canon that I've just mentioned. And it's about one of the things that she did, and because we're at the Atlantic Renewal Summit, Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me book. She helped adapt it for the stage, and it opened our season last year, and actually it's coming back again because it's going to tour. But it was adapted to the stage with an original soundtrack or music by Jason Moran, and then there were actors who read excerpts of this book on stage, and it was really very compelling. I'm not doing it justice because it was very moving and amazing, but that's an example of social issues meeting cultural, sort of the cultural showing what putting it to music, putting it to making it prose on the stage, and it was really very impactful. I have not given it justice in this description, but it's quite amazing, and that's the kind of work. That's one example. Another example is we collaborated with Opera Philadelphia, and we did We Shall Not Be Moved, which is an opera that focused on the movement in Philadelphia that happened in the 80s. And people say opera, the Apollo. Well, opera because of the stories that it's telling. And so it's an example of showing people the relevancy of the Apollo today. And of course, popular music will always be something that's on the Apollo stage, something that I guess appeals to a more a younger demographic, if you will, and we're actually going to hear from somebody in a minute
Very soon.
as an example.
Did we have any questions from the audience? I'm going to let the mics go. I do want to ask about, you've been involved with Apollo for years. You were on the board before you became the president and the CEO, and the Apollo has had difficult financial times. What has been your strategy to make it financially healthy?
Well, I think a number of things. To stabilize the organization, and with any nonprofit, the board is very important. And so building the board, developing the board with a cross-section of people who bring different resources, different skill sets. The other thing is to, you have to have a business plan. That's why we're not-for-profit. 1,500 seats. The financial model didn't work as a commercial establishment. So beginning to first putting the human resources in place, hiring really great people in key positions. So development, fundraising is very important, but also diversifying the sources of revenue, having a more strategic approach to rental of the facility. We call them curated rentals, rentals that sort of make sense in the context of the greater programming strategy. And also looking to tap into the brand equity. There are a number of ways in which we can exploit that and do some different things like licensing, and we're pursuing that strategy. But right now, largely, it's through fundraising, and you have to have great programming so that people will want to support your institution, and I think that's what we've done.
Great. Are the mics in the audience? We've got a couple of questions down front, or it's hard to see. Hi, it's hard to see you. There you go. Hi. What's your? Can you tell us
I'm
your name is?
Rachel. I think there's an echo.
You're Rachel, and
I'm Rachel. I'm a writer and a former development director, fundraiser for nonprofits, both in cultural institutions, but mostly anti-poverty and environmental groups. And so I was just curious, with working with these other cultural institutions and organizations, especially with the smaller seating venues, are you pursuing collaboration grants, and are you pursuing fundraising together for programming, or is this all under Apollo Theater?
No, absolutely. I think that collaboration is really important. And so there are a number of programs that require collaboration, or we want to collaborate with, and we do go out and fundraise together. And there's certain instances where we've kind of been the lead fundraiser because it's been able to help the smaller cultural organizations tap into resources that they probably wouldn't have been able to, but for having us as a part of the team.
got a question down front.
So my name is Vidal Guzman. I actually live in Harlem. My question to you is, gentrification didn't just happen. It happened because some of our people that's black and brown didn't know financial literacy. So my question to you, as you thinking about programming, knowing that Apollo is actually the heart of Harlem, are you going to try to teach entrepreneurship to the younger generation that's black and brown in certain neighborhoods?
Financial literacy.
Yeah, well, sort of our contribution to entrepreneurship is through our education program. We have an internship program, and we have a young professional sort of internship program. And our program focuses on careers behind the scenes, not on the stage. So, working and understanding, if you're interested in the technical side of things, or, being, if you're interested in marketing, if you're interested in development, fundraising. And so these students come and they actually work in these different areas. The other thing that we do we have something called the Young Producers Club, and these are students who have gone through our internship program, and they come back and they actually produce shows. They may produce our amateur night. They may work on other shows. And so one of the things that we're working to do to build that program out and scale it is to figure out, we want to focus more on sort of the digital landscape and careers in, sort of the creative and entertainment spaces. And so that will require us we have a grant to come up with a pilot for that now. And one of the things that we'll need to do is establish partnerships with different companies so that we can actually place some of these young people. So that's our contribution to entrepreneurship in that space.
And we have time for one more question.
Golden. I understand it's legendary that Ella Fitzgerald on Talent Night was not voted in twice. She had to go for a third audition before she was voted in at the Apollo Theater. Is that correct?
Well,
Legends of the Apollo.
Yeah, right. That's funny. I have not heard the story about her trying to be able to compete on amateur night, but the story that we know is that she was supposed to come onto the stage and dance, and she was standing out in the wings, and she was watching some dancers who preceded her, and she got very nervous and said, "I'm not going on. I can't do this. I can't follow these amazing dancers." And so the MC said, "Well, you got to go on. So what are you going to do?" And she said, "Well, I sing a little." And so she sang a little, and the rest is history. And she won amateur night.
This is a perfect segue because I want to bring to the stage a two-time winner of Apollo's Amateur Night and the 2017 winner of the televised program Showtime at the Apollo. Please welcome 17-year-old Alexis Morass. Alexis, come on in. So, Alexis, you're a Jersey girl, youngest of 6.
Absolutely.
When did you start singing?
Well, I started singing. First of all, hello, everyone. Hopefully you guys are doing well today. But I started singing when I was 3 years old. My mom and my dad, who are in the audience, were based in gospel, both sides of my family, actually. But I've always been very interested in all genres of music. And my supportive parents have given me space to, really venture out and do whatever I've wanted to do as far as music. But I started really singing jazz when I was 12 years old. I was in a jazz band at the local school that I was going to. And now here I am. It's been a wonderful experience, honestly. As you guys were talking about Ella Fitzgerald, and she had her start on the famous Apollo stage. That's where I had my start at the age of 14. And I've really been blessed to just perform and travel. It's been a wonderful experience for me.
What is it like to be on an amateur night? What does that feel like? Knowing the audience
too, right?
It feels like nervousness. It feels like an achievement, knowing that there were a long line of greats who came before you. And then seeing yourself have the opportunity to say, I'm going to make my mark on this stage. It is just a wonderful feeling to really get out there and have the audience love you. I mean, the good thing was they had a rule, no booing kids. It could have went either way. But it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. My parents have taught me how to, get down to business. Nerves, we don't really accept nerves, They've really just trained me in the best way possible. So being on the Apollo stage, yes, it does come with nervousness, but it's really just a wonderful achievement and experience.
Well, I'm going to ask, you're there. This is James Austin Jr., who's your musical director and uncle.
Yes.
Uncle should go first. I do
Yes.
want to say thank you to Jonelle Procope. Thank you so much for being with us. And
Thank you.
You're in for a treat. Alexis Morass.
My funny Valentine, sweet, 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 sweet comic Valentine. You make me smile with my heart, my heart. Your looks, they are laughable, so unphotographable. Yet you're my favorite work of art. Is your figure less than Greek? Is your mouth a little weak when you open it to speak? Tell me, are you smart? So don't you change your hair for me. No, not if you care for me. Stay, little Valentine. Stay, because each day is Valentine's Day. This is James Austin Jr. Is your figure less than Greek? Is your mouth a little weak when you open it to speak? Tell me, are you smart? So don't you change a hair for me. Not if you care for me. Stay, stay, each day, each and every little day is Valentine's Day. Thank you very much.